Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Ghoul Guides Association. We are, of course, your Ghoul Guides. I'm Lauren.
And I'm Mary.
And we are back again today with the continuation of our series all about the very Gothic history of witches and witchcraft. So if you missed the first episode, why are you here? Go and watch or listen to that one. That's an order from your Ghoul Guide.
We'll put a link right here in this. If you're watching on YouTube, we'll include a link. Or if you're listening on any other podcast platform, the link to the previous episode will be in the description. So pause right now and go and watch or listen to that.
Yep, so last time we talked all about the Greco-Roman origins of witchcraft and the development of the concept of witchcraft in pre-Christian culture and mythology. We talked about how it started to crop up in literature, particularly classics like Jason and the Argonauts and Homer's Odyssey. And today we are going to be moving forward through the scheme of
time
history.
And space. Join us as we move through time and history and space.
Today on the Ghoul Guides.
So I guess let's just jump right into it.
Let's do it.
Yeah, cool. We have a lot to get through, I think. This is quite a big topic and a big area of witchcraft. So let's just go ahead. And as we mentioned, we're jumping ahead a bit. Our last episode we were talking about witchcraft in ancient Greece and Rome. And we're going to be focusing on witchcraft in Europe in the medieval or early modern period. So it is a little bit.
We're talking post-establishment of Christianity. I was going to say something really negative. I'm not going to. I'm going to keep it to myself.
You can tell me after. This period is really where I think a lot of well-known narratives and tropes and trends of witchcraft that we're familiar with today get established.
Absolutely.
And thank you for mentioning Christianity, because a lot of what happens in this period is shaped by the dominant cultures and religion, which was basically just Christianity. This is very different from the cultures that produce witches and goddesses of ancient Greece and Rome, like Hecate and Circe. Because Christianity is so foundational, I first wanted to talk about what the Bible actually says about witches. So, question to you, Lauren, are there any witches in the Bible?
All I know is that at some point in some Christian religious text that may be apocryphal, maybe the Bible, someone says thou shalt not suffer a witch to live.
We will get to that, but that is more of a directive, which I guess does assume that there are witches, or we'll get to the translation of that.
Well,
but
I think
before we do,
there must be. If someone's telling you that you can't suffer something to live,
but
it must be real.
We'll put a pin in that for now, because basically there is one really famous witch in the Bible, and that is the Witch of Endor.
Oh yeah, So fun story. I actually don't know anything about the Witch of Endor. I only know that there is a Witch of Endor because as a child, young teenager, back in the days of dial-up internet when I was Googling Star Wars, I thought the Witch of Endor was like a fun Star Wars story, and I was really disappointed to discover it was about the Bible.
If anyone is interested, you can go and read 1 Samuel, which is where she features. I don't know, is she in Star Wars? Maybe.
Endor is a forest moon where the Ewoks live, and it's where the final battle between the rebellion and the Empire happens in Return of the Jedi.
If you have any theories as to how the Witch of Endor is created to the forest Endor, then please do get in touch with us. So this kind of story focuses on an unnamed woman. In Endor, which was a place, and she's often referred to as the Witch of Endor. And she's just one of many kind of individuals in the Bible who is associated with magic and sorcery. Others, for example, include Moses. And I think we can all remember the really cool, like, kind of magic rap battle that Moses does with the Egyptian sorcerers, where they're turning sticks into snakes and things. Yeah. So it's not like magic isn't in the Bible, but there's only really one witch. And basically in the story, King Saul wanted to seek advice from the prophet Samuel, who was dead. So quite hard to kind of have a quick chat. So he went to visit this woman who could supposedly connect him with the dead. And so this woman then functions as a medium. She performs a ritual, and then Samuel speaks through her. So Saul gets to speak to Samuel, but through this woman. However, not everyone agrees about what exactly is happening here. So some believe that she was a ventriloquist, in that supernatural sense. It was actually the prophet Samuel who was speaking through her.
So a spirit medium.
Yeah. Or that perhaps it wasn't Samuel speaking at all. Maybe it was the devil who was, pretending and playing a prank on both of them. Because, obviously that's necromancy, and that's bad and would never be sanctioned by God,
Is it necromancy? I mean, in terms of Dungeons and Dragons, Speak with Dead is a necromantic spell, but I've always thought this, when we were talking back in our Ouija episode, when we were talking about spiritualism, it's not like a zombie or like...
Oh, so you're saying that anything or anybody that comes back from the dead is basically practicing necromancy, like, I don't know, Lazarus and Jesus?
What I'm saying is, how are those the same thing? I don't know. I don't believe that. Sorry, spoiler. Don't believe that spirit mediums are a thing. No disrespect. It's my personal belief, but I personally wouldn't categorize channeling. So, like, if channeling is something that you can actually do, one would assume that the spirit consents to be channeled with. So I kind of wouldn't think of it as being necromantic, because usually necromancy, like, part of the reason it's big bad no, don't do that, is because it, like, takes free will and consent away. So I just feel
sure. Yeah, and I think sure, and I think that we are obviously coming at it from our 21st century understanding of what necromancy has now been established to be. But yeah, anyway, others, like you with your declaration against spirit mediums, others also believe that maybe she was just faking. So rather than the devil using her to put on a show, maybe she was just doing that herself.
Well, if King Saul knocks on your door and is like, hey, I need you to channel a spirit for me, you're not going to be like, sorry, go away, because he might behead you. Also, he's probably got coin.
Yeah. Which I am going to use this story to link us to King James and get us back to that kind of early modern witchcraft period. So nice. King James was the monarch of Scotland and England in the 16th and 17th centuries. And for this podcast, he is important because of two of his publications. So Lauren, asking your question again, do you know what these are?
The Malleus Maleficarum.
No.
Oh no, what's it called?
But you're talking about his...
Yeah,
his book on
called?
Demonology.
Ah, that's it. And I should remember that because I had a rant about it in the Warren's episode. Yeah. James is one of those people where I'm always like, you had a lot of time for a man that ruled two countries. Yeah. So he has the text on demonology. Doesn't that have a Latin name as well, or am I mushing my texts together?
Demonology is spelt in a Latin way. If that, I don't know how to. It looks like it would sound exactly the same. I don't. But yeah, so the other one was the King James edition of the Bible.
Well, yeah, that.
So he wrote it. But did he? But like, if you're ever wondering, like, why is it called the King James version of the Bible or the King James Bible? It's this King James, and he didn't write the Bible. Spoiler. But this edition was originally commissioned in 1604, and then it was published in 1611, and it was sponsored and commissioned by King James, which is why it's called the King James Bible. He also didn't...
He's just taken other people's credit. He
yes,
just
he
paid
is.
for it.
Yes, he is. But I think it is important to associate this with him, because would it have been as fundamental and as important if it weren't associated with the king, who, as we know, is true. Literally God on earth. So this,
and he in particular really thought of himself as God on earth. I think it's probably important, isn't it, as well? Like, not only was this a royal sanctioned Bible, it was by a man who was like, I am the divine right of kings.
Yeah. So this was not the first English translation of the Bible, but it was also known as the authorized version, and being sanctioned by James meant that it was hugely influential.
I actually didn't know that. I thought it was the first. No, I thought it was the first. I had always been taught, obviously wrongly, but I'd always thought it was the first English language version. That's really interesting.
There was an earlier version, and the name of it escapes me. But yeah, this was I think at least the second official kind of one, or the second kind of complete one. But this one is without a doubt the most important. It has been described as one of the most important books in English culture. And I think even to today, it remains like a driving force in shaping like the English speaking world.
I think isn't like most, I know the edition, and not that my family are religious, but the one copy of the Bible we had was a King James Bible.
Yeah. And there are, we're not sponsored by this, so, there are...
Ghoul Guides, sponsored by the King James Bible.
There are... Yeah, there are other versions available. And I think that it is important to remember that this is a translation. So this is a translation often of translated text, or, it's an English translation of Greek and Aramaic and Hebrew, all these kinds of things. Okay, so why is this version of the Bible important when we're talking about witchcraft, though? Mm-hmm. And it's because, as you mentioned already, of that really infamous verse from Exodus 22:18, which says, "Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live." And if we think about this as a book in translation, so it's an English translation of Hebrew and Greek and Aramaic texts, this word isn't necessarily always translated in the same way. And actually, another translation of this verse switches out witch for poisoner, which is quite subtly different.
Yes, but that does make sense, because when I was doing my research for the last episode about Greco-Roman, I mentioned this in the episode that witch was used kind of like interchangeably for mostly women's professions. So like herbalist, seer, midwife, chanter, like they were all called witch. And I mean, if you think about things like aquatofana, like poisoning was particularly seen as like a women's art and like a women's magic. So actually, that probably goes back to the like Greek origins of witch as a term,
which is really interesting, because I've never thought about going all the way back to like Greece and Rome, but that makes total sense.
Well, yeah, because I guess, if we think about how they were translating these texts back then, what they were often doing, it's not like now necessarily where we would be using a
Google Translate
dictionary. Oh yeah, Google Translate, taking a photo, like Google AI do the job. But like, this is what they did with like obviously like the Rosetta Stone and stuff like that, is where you compare. So it's probably that somewhere someone's gone, oh yeah, poisoner is witch. That word means witch. And actually it didn't. It meant poisoner, but it could also mean witch, because witch was an interchangeable term for a poisoner, a herbalist, a seer, a midwife, a healer.
Yeah.
And then freaking King James's sponsored translator has gone,
yeah,
we hate women. It says witch.
Yeah. So I think that is the first publication, and I think that I think it's really interesting that we have this through line here between like these ancient and kind of early modern periods. But if we turn to the second book, then, which is, as we mentioned before, demonology, and
Malleus Maleficarum.
No. Now, and I think this is what always makes me laugh, is that obviously, we're both British and we've had to suffer through a lot of kind of, media about royals, and obviously everyone talking about Prince Harry's memoirs as being the most outrageous thing that the monarchy has ever published. Yeah, and this whole way through, I've been sat here being like, do you not remember that time that like the literal King of England published what was essentially a philosophical treatise about witches and witchcraft? Like, maybe that's a little bit more embarrassing.
Yeah, no. I know, as a scholar of, British nationalism, I know which I would prefer to read.
But yeah, so this was first published in 1597, and then it was later republished in 1603. So it did come out before the kind of translated version of the King James Bible, but it was republished when he took the throne of England, because obviously that's what you would do when you've just gained another country and the throne of a country. Be like, I must publish like my best and most favorite.
It's like when a group releases a debut single and then they get really popular, like the Killers did this. They get really popular with the second single, so they release their first single. Now they're popular. He was like, shit, now I'm King of Great Britain. Like.
Yeah, or like when like a
that
film
was an anachronism.
A film version comes out and then like you republish the book, like now a major motion picture.
Or when Twilight came out and they republished an edition of Wuthering Heights that was like Bella's favourite book. The King's about witches.
So this is all of that.
This brand James the First.
And obviously, all of his most loyal fans would have both editions.
They were like, I liked him when it was James the Sixth.
Okay, so what is this work really about? It basically discusses ideas surrounding necromancy, divination, and black magic in ancient periods, but also his contemporary society. And it includes a study of demons and demonology. And then, of course, this book not only discusses witches, but it explicitly endorses the practice of witch hunting. Mm-hmm. So, speaking directly to his reader, James opens the book by stating, and please forgive me, this is written in kind of like early modern English. So if I say, it's, I will be not translating, but, the fearful abounding at this time in this country of these detestable slaves of the devil, the witches or enchanters, hath moved me, brackets, beloved reader, and brackets, to dispatch in post this following treatise of mine, to resolve the doubting, both that such assaults of Satan are most certainly practised, and that the instrument thereof merits most severely to be punished. And what does he have to say of the Witch of Endor? Because, obviously, like, James is going to talk about the most, like, well, the only, like, individual witch in the Bible. He categorizes her as Saul's Pythoness. And he compares her, you might like this, to the ancient Greek oracle Pythia. So he's basically, to kind of sum up what he's saying, witches are real, witches are bad, we should punish them. And it's even in the Bible because, like, this witch is basically a serpent.
Yeah, he's kind of like proto-Gothicizing there as well, because even though I know I said, the whole thing about Barbarous was non-Hellenic, but he's doing that very Puritan Protestant thing of saying anything that is pre-Christian, anything that is not, in the name of Jesus, is evil, is, sinful, is barbaric, and is other. So he's kind of doing that early on. Can I just say, one of the things that always gets me about James 6+1 is how does the son of such a badass woman like Mary Queen of Scots and the heir/cousin nephew to Elizabeth I, I mean, this is probably why he does it, because he's like solidifying his power, come in and be like, you know what? Witches.
Well,
Let's
we
kill
are
women.
we are going to come back to James the First, unfortunately, or maybe, I don't know, maybe you're enjoying our kind of discussion of James the First. We're going to come back to him in a little bit.
Yeah.
And
I'm okay with
maybe we will answer that question.
Thank you.
But yeah, for now, I think just to kind of sum up where we are, give a little TLDR.
Nice.
There were biblical foundations to early modern concepts of witches. So basically, Christian interpretations were actively using the Bible as a foundation. And previously, the existence of witches and witchcraft had been denied by Christianity, and it was considered to be a pagan superstition. So exactly like what you said, like looking back to ancient Greece, it was kind of like, well, these are like pagans and they're just, they're doing stuff and they're doing bad stuff, and that's not what we do. And even if we go back to Moses, I really like this example because a lot of Christian interpretations are like, well, Moses was doing this stuff. He was turning like a rod into a snake because of the power of God. But all of those Egyptian sorcerers were doing black magic, which is bad.
That kind of works within the kind of, it's not quite theology, is it? But like, that was the thing, that like witchcraft was based on an individual's power and communion with a potentially divine, but not necessarily divine figure. So it was kind of easy. If you're saying all of those gods that you thought, because early Christianity is also dealing with the fact that it's monotheism and you've got all these pantheons and you're saying those pantheons are shit, they're not true, they're all superstition. So if the pantheons aren't real, then witchcraft can't be real, because the existence of witchcraft would imply the existence of this alternative pantheon. So it's like early Christianity says, yeah, witchcraft, full of shit, only one God. Anything that people in the Bible do is because God is giving them power. Enter the devil. That makes so much sense in terms of like, if you think about the structure of a religion and the retelling and the reframing of previous history and mythology, then you have to basically delegitimize and depower all of those things. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense that early Christians were like, no, there's no witches, babe.
Yeah, it was seen as pagan superstition and just people being a little bit, weird. But, and this is why I think this period is really interesting, works like the King James Bible and also James's own like demonology, they signal a shift in mainstream Christianity where witches are not only real, but they're also seen as a threat. So it's no longer, pagan superstition and weirdos who are, not working in reality, but there are these evil entities and these people who are working with the devil explicitly to harm Christians and Christianity. And biblical interpretations were often used to promote often a gendered view of witches, although this isn't necessarily exclusively like gendered, but also to promote witch hunts. So yeah, in this kind of perspective, this is where you get the idea that witchcraft is bad, it's connected to the devil, and so witches must be killed. Which brings us to the European witch hunt. Yeah, which brings us to the European witch hunt. So that was kind of our kind of biblical kind of foundations, and now we're going to get to the actual witch hunts.
Yeah, themselves. We've done a hop, skip, and a jump through about 1,500 years of history, and now we're into the witch trials. Also, fun fact, did you know that some people think that the reason that there was werewolf trials in other European countries and not in the UK is because we eradicated wolves by the mid 1500s, and then it was like, shit, we need someone else to blame bad things on. So rather than being like, oh, werewolves, because wolves, were a major predator, they were like, oh no, women and transgressive people, oh no, outsiders.
Those are the same as wolves.
Yeah, just one of those things where you come across a fact and you're like, whatever that phenomenon's called, where you notice something that's relevant to the thing that you're doing.
Yeah.
That thing.
No, and maybe we should look into werewolf trials. That sounds great.
Ooh, I know. I didn't know there was werewolf trials, so yeah.
Neither did I. So yeah.
Store that one away.
Yeah. 100%. We will be coming back to that maybe.
Okay.
Okay. Witch trials. So these trials and witch hunts took place predominantly in Europe from about 1400 to about 1782, although there was a peak period of between 1560 and 1630. So during this period, this kind of big, kind of from the 15th to the 18th century, obviously it's really hard to get an exact number, but sources estimate that about 100,000 trials occurred across Europe. Some trials could last for years, and suspects were then kept in prisons and subject to poor conditions and continual tests and torture. About 40,000 to 60,000 people were killed as suspected witches during the peak, which is quite a lot of people.
That's a lot of people.
Yeah.
Especially when you think about the population numbers at that period of time.
They would have been smaller.
This is also, like we're also talking about periods of time that, you know, had like epidemics and like, is it technically pandemic? We don't know if it was worldwide, but epidemics across Europe frequently. So not a huge population size. So that is a lot of people.
And many of these people were, you're probably thinking, burned at the stake. Yes, a lot of them were burned at the stake, but there were also a lot of people who were hanged. So these were the kind of two main ways that you died. Obviously, assuming that you didn't die in jails.
Or getting fucking dunked or any of the other stupid shit that they did.
Yeah. But in England and Scotland, there were several acts, including the Witchcraft Act of 1563, or the Act Against Conjurations, Enchantments, and Witchcrafts. And this act, because yes, it was an actual like political legal act that got passed and had the sanction of the monarch, it formally criminalised witchcraft. It imposed the death penalty in certain circumstances. And it also, interestingly, transferred witch trials from the church to secular courts. So this was very much a kind of thing that you didn't necessarily need to be sanctioned by the church. Obviously, most people were doing it from within that kind of Christianity kind of community, but also you could just go out and, or as a government, you could send a kind of investigator or.
Well, I guess even at that point in time, it kind of is legitimizing it, isn't it? If it's secular and it's baked into like state national law rather than church law, then it's, even at this time where like the word of the church is kind of the word of the law, it's making it like a constitutional thing.
Yeah, exactly. Although again, with Britain, because we have a constitutional monarchy that is also the head of the Church of England and with the divine right of kings, that does kind of, you know, anything that the monarch does and that the government does is also tied to the Church of England. But it was through the kind of government branches and those kinds of things.
But what about the Magna Carta, Mary? Sorry.
What about it?
Also, did you know, you mentioned a lot of these people died in jail. A big reason for that was not just because of typhoid fever. You had to pay in jail if you wanted food or anything like that. Prior to the reforms in like the 18th century, if you were imprisoned, you had to pay to be there. And if not, you got chucked in the pits.
Which ridiculous for me.
Horrendous.
I can't work because I'm in jail, but you expect me to pay. Okay.
Oh no, if you were a debtor, you could work in jail to pay your debt off. But you can't work because you're in jail, and if you can't pay, you literally got thrown down a pit with the rats, and chances of surviving were very slim.
Yeah.
Ugh.
So if you're also thinking this sounds like a lot and you're talking about Christianity, but which flavor of Christianity is doing all of these bad things about witches? You may be horrified to learn that it's all of them. So both Catholic,
check all the boxes.
Both Catholic and Protestant regimes targeted witches and those suspected of witchcraft. So in Catholic Spain and Portugal, witchcraft trials were undertaken as part of the Inquisition. But these trials were actually less common because the Inquisition itself focused more on heresy investigations, looking at people who were suspected of being Jews, because the Inquisition was very anti-Semitic, and also people who were heretics and like anti-government and working against the kind of
they used
Spanish
it against a lot of they used it against a lot of Moorish people as well, particularly the kind of like heresy, witchcraft all blended into one. Was used to force a lot of Moors out.
Yeah, so they did have witchcraft trials, but these were often either part of or taken over by other kinds of heresy investigations. There were also mass witch trials in certain areas of southern Germany, so this area at the time was kind of under the control of Catholic prince bishops. And these trials lasted for years, and they would end with the mass kind of execution of hundreds of men and women and children. So it was kind of like a long drawn out thing where lots and lots of people would be killed regardless of like age or gender.
That's horrific. I wonder if that's the reason why there's so many witch tales that come out of those areas of Germany, or what became Germany.
I have chosen some examples to kind of finish this episode, but they are based in Britain. But I think, if we do want to come back to witchcraft, or if anyone listening wants to kind of suggest another topic, I think, Germany sounds like a really interesting place that I don't know that much about. But as I said, like there were also, lots of trials that took place in England and Scotland, and other Protestant countries such as the Netherlands also had a significant period of witch trials. So this was very much widespread across Europe, lots of countries, lots of different kinds of Christian communities that undertook them. And now what I want to do quickly is turn to a book that you have already mentioned before.
Yay!
And I hope that you didn't think that I was ignoring you when you said that, because yes, we also do need to talk about the Malleus Maleficarum.
No, I'm just glad that I'm not an idiot and that is a thing. I was like, 100%. Did I make that up? Is that from a video game? Because my brain always gives me the Necronomicon, and I'm like, that's not it. That's made up. I mean, they're all made up. But you know what I mean.
This was a period not only before the internet, not only before like film and TV, but it was also where, the main thing that you would do for fun or for, if you were learned or that was write books or write volumes or investigate things. And so in this period where, as we mentioned, witchcraft and witch hunts were sanctioned by church organizations, but also governments. And so writing books about witches and witch hunts and how to spot a witch, or even just, pushing back a little bit and investigating whether or not they really exist. There are tons of these kinds of volumes. But like James's demonology, Malleus Maleficarum is one of the most influential books to come out of this period. And that this was written by a German Catholic clergyman and also inquisitor called Heinrich Kramer. And it was first published in Germany in 1486. So it's quite an early text.
Earlier than I thought it was.
Really early. And it was translated into English as The Hammer of the Witches, which I just think is a really fun title.
That's a great band name.
Yeah. He was condemned by the church. So the Catholic Church, every now and then you see someone and you're like, are you really like representing a kind of established view of like whatever religious organization? And then you look them up and it's like, no, this person has been like,
it's like schism. Sometimes enforced schism, sometimes voluntary schism.
Yeah. But again, again, you can see this in like recent kind of examples, but this kind of, exile or excommunication or whatever only adds to like the popularity of such texts. Like,
I've been thinking this recently, looking at some, because this is what you do when you're autistic and a researcher, you do fun research. So I've been doing some fun research, as I like to do, on cult leaders. And it's really fascinating. And obviously we see this as well with like figures like Trump or Jordan Peterson, where it's like once the quote unquote mainstream media disavows somebody, they often gain popularity. And the same is true right through history. Like, you know, the early 2nd and 3rd century Christian cults and the weird 12th and 13th century like secret orders and religious movements. Like, there's so, once you make something other, it instantly gains traction.
Yeah, 100%. And I think, like, maybe Trump's not the right example there, but like, I think it's a pretty good example of that kind of, being disavowed by these established organizations, and then that kind of, that pushback being something that helps.
I guess with Trump, it was more he tried to claim that that's what had been done to him to get that same popularity. But like, you get those people that are like on the fringe / literally cult leaders.
Yeah. So we know what the King James Bible says. It says that, we shouldn't allow witches to live, so therefore they must die. We also know what demonology says, that, witches are bad and should die. So any guesses as to what the Malleus Maleficarum suggests or says about witches?
Well, I apparently thought that Malleus Maleficarum was demonology, so I'm actually not sure. I know that, or I actually don't know now. I'm not sure. I feel like one of them talks about things like familiars and third nipples and all of those weird things that we think.
Basically, I was doing a setup there, and in the, like the other two texts, it also argues that witches are evil and should be punished by deaths. Cool. So like the things that are different about them are, I guess, some of the discussions and the methods. But ultimately, I think what's important is that all of these texts are basically suggesting that the only way to solve a witch problem, because obviously witches are a problem, is to kill them. It also links them to heretics, and it says that like heretics, witches should be burned at the stake. This text also says that torture can be used to get confessions, and that torture is good, and that torture followed by death is the only certain way to end, quote, the evils of witchcraft. So, I think it's it's often, I think
you go to the bookshop and you just want a nice little guide on how to make a puppet, and you see the Hammer of the Witches and you think, yes, I'm a witch and I want to know about my hammer, and then you open that and you're like, oh good god.
I think it's really interesting because it often comes up in a lot of popular media as a kind of witchy book, and it's like, yes, it is a witchy book, but it's like not really in the way that you think. So like other texts, it also suggests that witchcraft is not only connected with Satan, but, and this is a quote, that witchcraft is a heresy, I say, of sorceresses, since it is to be designated by the particular sex over which he is known to have power. So this is not only a pact with the devil, but it's a sexual relationship.
Yeah.
And this work in particular really helped promote the idea that witches, the sex-specific idea that witches were women. And I have to say, I think Kramer is really just, like a lot of men, just railing against the fact that women maybe don't want to have sex with him, or that he's had some bad experiences with women in the past. And he's really putting a lot of that kind of anger about women onto just, maybe a bad relationship that he had.
Yeah. This is his incel manifesto.
Yeah. 100%.
I mean, I know I said last time that, like, witchcraft, like, people were trialed for witchcraft in, like, Greco-Roman societies, but it was more kind of like, if you think that witchcraft is real and someone's cursed you or you've caused someone's crap, like, that would be a crime. It wasn't the fact that you had used magic. And I do sometimes wonder, like, how much of the divine feminine elements that were coming out of old pagan and pre-Christian traditions that, now like I said last time, there's figures that we now think of as being connected to witchcraft, and that we'll talk about later on when we talk about like modern Wicca and stuff, that are revered as like deities of witchcraft and stuff like that. And I wonder how much of it was like, same with like, oh, gossiping's a sin, you can't gossip, just part of this like patriarchal campaign across the centuries to shut women, and to not just women, but anyone other, but predominantly in these instances, women down, and to stop, like, to disempower women. Like, no, you can't talk to each other, you can't share knowledge, you can't have any divine femininity, all that's bad, you're just witches.
And I think, as I said, there were lots of texts here, but the most important, I think, I would include the King James Bible, but also demonology and Malleus Maleficarum, I think, are probably the most important texts. And I think it is notable that, while I'm sure there were others that maybe did not advance this sex-specific argument, and we know that men were also targeted, often sometimes in some countries equally to or more than women, but in our interpretation and kind of, working through these kinds of things, this is what has stuck, and what essentially generations and centuries since have taken away from the witch trials. It's not only that witchcraft is bad, but that witchcraft is specifically gendered, which I think is interesting. Okay, so some people think that this was perhaps used as as a kind of inquisitorial manual for witch trials that was used by contemporaneous individuals as a kind of, this is how you should put on a witch trial. But as Jenny Gibbons has said, this isn't necessarily true. And she says, authors naively assumed that the book painted an accurate picture of how the Inquisition tried witches. Heinrich Kramer, the text's demented author, was held up as a typical inquisitor. His rather stunning sexual preoccupations were presented as the church's official position on witchcraft. But actually, the Inquisition immediately rejected the legal procedures Kramer recommended and censured the inquisitor himself just a few years after the Malleus was published. Secular courts, not inquisitorial ones, resorted to the Malleus. So it is influential, but not by the church and the Inquisition.
Well, that makes sense, because the Inquisition is almost like aggressively by the book, and by the book I mean the biblical book. Like, there was almost no room for it's like a fascism of fanaticism, isn't it? Like, the Inquisition.
But part of that fanaticism is big personalities, and I think this personality was just not one that they wanted to endorse or support in any way. But as she mentioned, it was used by secular courts. And the Encyclopedia Britannica says that the Malleus went through 28 editions between 1486 and 1600. So King James with your 2 editions of demonology, eat your heart out.
King James could never.
It was also used by Roman Catholics and Protestants as an authoritative source of information that concerned Satanism, and as a guide to Christian defenses against Satan. So it comes back to that idea of, like, you can push something outside of your kind of remit, but in doing so, you perhaps give them a larger platform. Maybe Trump is the right way to look at this guy and his influence.
Same level of batshit crazy. And negative outcomes.
Well, so that is the Malleus Maleficarum. Obviously, there's lots more that we can talk about it. But what I want to do for the kind of final part of this episode is to just kind of look at some kind of areas in England and Scotland that had quite notable kind of witch hunts. And so, if we go back to or stick with King James and just talk a little bit about Scottish witch hunts.
Yes.
So it is estimated that between 3,000 and 4,000 people were accused of being witches, and may have even been killed in Scotland in the years 1560 to 1707. So it's a very short period of time. Scotland, not that densely populated. So this is a large kind of proportion, and Scottish kind of witch hunts there's so many, and comparatively, like, the proportion of how many people were accused and killed of witchcraft is one of the most significant kind of geographical areas, not just in like kind of Britain, but also in terms of Europe. But what kind of started it, what got the ball rolling? And yes, thank you, King James, that goes back to him. So this starts with the North Berwick witch trials, which were the trials that took place in 1590 of people in East Lothian in Scotland. And also it included people of St Andrew's Aldkirk, apologies for my pronunciation. And these trials ran for 2 years and they implicated over 70 people. And importantly, I think, like the accusation of witchcraft was that it took place on Halloween night and potentially implicated the monarch himself. So this was the first major witchcraft persecution in Scotland. And the tribunals were actually ordered by our good friend King James. He heard news of similar trials in Denmark, and these were relating to confessions of witchcraft, where those accused were basically charged with having caused a storm by their sorcery. You might think, oh, well, that seems a bit weird. Why is James getting involved in that? And it's because it involves a ship that he and his wife were on. He went to Denmark, got married to Anne. They came back. The journey back was a bit rocky, a bit stormy, quite bad actually. And this was then investigated in Denmark, and they found all these people that had apparently, probably under the duress of torture, confessed to on Halloween having consorted with the devil and caused this storm. James heard this and was like, that's interesting. I'm going to do that myself as well. So he set up similar trials, obtained similar confessions under torture, and then again, probably influenced him in writing his own publication. So this kind of predated slightly demonology.
I wonder how much of this is about a young Protestant king who at this point knows he is most likely the heir to the English throne as well as the Scottish throne, whose mother, was a controversial figure because she was Catholic and she had been married to, she'd been raised in France. I do wonder, because witchcraft is so tied to heresy and things like that, like how much this was his genuine, and maybe he's one of those people where like it started out as a power play and then he came to fully believe it. But yeah, I've not thought about the timeline in terms of like, it's around the time of his marriage. He specifically went and married a Protestant princess. There was still a lot of Catholic families in Scotland. He knew he was most likely going to be the first king of England and Scotland, and how much of this was just this kind of show of I am the divine king. Like, I am a powerful king. I am a righteous king. God has chosen me. I enforce God's will on earth.
And I think you've just hit the nail on the head. Like, I think there are two sides to James's interest in witchcraft. And we know that in these trials, and also in the subsequent trials in Scotland, that heresy was a big part of that. And people were accused of being against the king and against the crown and the monarch and the country. And this was not just something, diabolic and evil, but something that was potentially, also going up to the highest thing that you could get, be, other than God, who else is there on earth that is God's representative? And that is the monarch. So it's both a kind of, are you threatening me? But also, I'm going to use this trial to implicate my my adversaries. But I also think that, he's also a very young prince king, and he probably did have a bad time on that boat. And then also was thinking, my wife, because, what if both of them had died? And maybe that also then fueled his superstitions.
Well, yeah, if you think about being James Stewart, you are the last of two lines. You are the last Stuart. You are the last Tudor. There's already been all of this. I mean, he wasn't. There were other Stuarts like Arbella and people like that. But like, you know, Mary, Queen of Scots had, you know, her dad famously like saw him, died angry that she was a girl because his sons had died and he needed a prince. And there had been so much succession crisis and gender crisis wrapped up in this lineage. And I wouldn't have been surprised if he did. It's no wonder when you think about it that he saw himself as a divinely blessed king, because if you looked at like all of the chaos that had gone from the War of the Roses to the birth of James 6/1, it's no wonder that he was like that. But yeah, it would have also potentially, I could totally see this as being part power play, part belief, and then as time goes on, that blurring of the line between using something to reestablish your power and to be like, if people thought that they were cursing me, I need to come down harsh on them, even if I don't think they were. And I think demons are real.
Yeah, like, well, it's handy, you know. I think you're cursing me, and I think this other person is a political opponent, so I'll just get rid of both of you. But yeah, I think it's always interesting to think about the witch trials in Scotland in that kind of context, but also just the witch trials in Scotland and England, because I think James did have such a big influence on you know, both of those countries. But yeah, so that is a little kind of foray into Scottish witch trials and witchcraft. I can't, you know, we could do a whole episode on every single country, and maybe in the future we will. It's something that if you're enjoying this witch series and you want more of it, then I think there's definitely more to kind of delve into. But what I want to talk about now quickly is the Pendle witches. Just because there's so much that I wanted to put in this episode, and
I thought you were going to say something else.
And okay. Well, yeah. Well,
and I'm sure. Have you got another bit after this?
Yeah, I do.
Okay, well that makes sense, because I was like, she's obviously going to talk about this thing. Let's talk about the Pendle witches first.
Let's talk about the Pendle witches, because the Pendle witch trials is probably one of the most famous witch trials in England, and these took place in 1612, and as part of these trials, 12 men and women were accused and charged with the murders of 10 other people by witchcraft. 11 people then went to trial, and then 10 were eventually found guilty and hanged. And you might be thinking, you know, we've been talking about mass trials where hundreds of people have been killed or dozens of people have been killed. Like 10 isn't that many, but like out of the percentage of people who were accused, 12 original people were accused. 11 went to trial, and then 10 were murdered. That is quite a lot of people who were found guilty and then they were hanged.
And it's basically, is it one entire family or two entire families? But it's like a whole, like 3 generations of a family.
Yeah. So the majority of the people accused were women. And as you said, it includes 2 families. So that's Elizabeth Southerns, who was also known as Demdike, and Anne Whittle, who's also known as Chattocks. And both of these individuals were women in their 80s whose children and grandchildren were also accused. And they also include Alice Nutter and Janet Preston. You might be familiar with these names. This is like a really famous trial that has, you know, it's all over kind of popular media and the internet.
Well, you know, I don't think it's true, but you know the family myth on my mum's side of the family, don't you?
Yeah, so but I know it because you've said it to me before, but you should share this with our listeners.
My mum's grandmother, so my paternal great-grandmother? No, my mum's paternal great-grandmother, that's right. My mum's dad's mum. Even though that they were from South London, but she maintained throughout her life that we were descended from the Pendle witches. I was like, when I found this out, I was like, oh, I don't think that could be true because they killed the whole family. But there would have potentially been other relatives. I managed to trace my family line back to Lancaster, but only to the 18th century. I could not get it back to the 17th century. So it definitely had some lineage from that, but the family mythology is that we are, on her side of the family, descended from the Pendle witches. So I've always had a bit of a fascination with them, apart from being a Gothicist, because I don't think it's true. I think...
What if it is, and what if you are actually a witch?
Well, that would be fucking awesome. My life generally is not that cool. I mean, it wouldn't be awesome because that means that somewhere in my family history, like, my family was murdered in a witch trial. But it's always been a fun thing as like I'll probably never know unless I get really famous and someone can take me on who do you think you are? Because this is my free ancestry.com account didn't take me far enough back. Yeah, it's always been a big point of interest to me. I've always felt a bit of, I mean, it's a very sad story anyway, but I've always felt a bit of a weird emotional connection to it. So yeah, maybe I'm a witch.
I mean, aren't we all witches?
I got the vibes. You got the vibes.
Yeah. No, I think that's really interesting though, and I think, you know, maybe if someone wants to do some investigating, you can help Lauren to trace her family line beyond the 18th century. You know, get in touch. So if we do go back to the Pendle witches, there's lots of suggestions that these families, like many others in the areas, made their livings from healings.
Mm-hmm.
They used herbs and talismans to heal the sick, and it was a kind of like, you know, a local business. And there were also suggestions that perhaps the families were rivals and basically turned on each other. So maybe they both had these kind of like family businesses and they were encroaching on the other, and taking away business from the other. As well as this, Elizabeth Southerns, or Demdike, had in fact been believed to have been a witch for over 50 years. Yeah. So this is a woman in her 80s, and there have been rumours and suggestions and gossip that she's been a witch for decades, you know, half a century.
Well, you're a woman in your 80s, you've had kids, it's the 1500s, you know.
Yeah, but I mean, you're a woman in your 30s, why, you know.
Yeah, true. But what I mean is there was, I think, people that, women that lived past 60, like, witchcraft was, oh, that person must be a witch. Like, you get a lot of that kind of like, is it just an old woman who lives on the edge of town, or are they a witch? Or are they both?
And I think there's lots of that in these kinds of stories about the Pendle witches. And there were also, so part of the charges about this group included the accusation that they were transforming into animals, or that they had spirit familiars. And the allegation, so there's also an allegation that Elizabeth Southerns, or Demdike, had a witch's mark on her body that also then proved that she had allowed the devil to suck her blood. Yeah. So that I think what's interesting is that here there's two kind of popularized ideas connected to witches in this period, that witches could turn into animals. And I think there's a really interesting story about a hare involving the witches, but also that they had familiars. So, you know, oh, that old woman has got like all these kinds of like woodland creatures. It's not a Disney princess. Maybe she's a witch.
She's a hare.
Yeah. But then there's also this idea that like you had a kind of witch's mark. And what is a witch's mark? It's basically an area on their body that witches had said to Satan, this is where you can suck my blood from. And I mean, I don't know. I think I'm not alone in thinking, you know, I've got lots of weird marks on my bodies. You know, you've got birthmarks, you've got moles. Yeah. All it takes is for someone to be like, what is that? I don't have that on my body. I think that's a witch's mark.
Yeah. I've got a massive birthmark. There's many reasons I probably would have either been executed or locked up. But yeah, I definitely probably would have been found guilty of having a witch mark.
Yeah. So I think this is a really interesting kind of witch trial to focus on. And again, like there's so much more that we could say about it. And if you want an episode entirely on the Lancaster witches, where maybe we dive more into Lauren's connection,
we could finally go and do the Pendle Witch Trail.
Yes. If you want that, then get in touch.
Donate to our Ko-fi so we can pay for the petrol and drive to Lancaster.
Yes. This is just a little snippet, because finally, the last thing that I want to talk about, and again, I think you do want to guess, yeah.
Guess. Is it Colchester Castle or the Colchester Witches?
It's Essex. It's just Essex in general.
I knew it would be.
If this is your first time tuning in, then you might not know that I am obsessed with Essex witches, because I'm from Essex, and
Mary,
I think it's really
from Essex, I would say at this point.
Oh, thank you. And Essex is known as the witching county, because I think not to the kind of proportions that Scotland had, as we said, like in terms of like the population of Scotland and then the amount of people who were accused and killed of witches. It's not like that, but Essex had so many people that were accused and killed.
So historically, Scottish, even though we have been technically one nation since 1707 and the Act of Union, like Scottish, Welsh and Irish history is often not centralized in the way that English history is. So even though the Scottish witch trials were bigger and more deadly, English history and therefore British history has always centered that over it, which, that's just part of a bigger thing. But there's a lot to be said about those Essex witch trials.
There is a lot to be said, and I'm obviously not going to be able to touch on all of it, but there is one person in particular that I wanted to mention, because I think it sets up our next episode quite nicely. But yeah, so as you said, like Colchester Castle was a big part of the witch trials. There are a lot of women and men who were locked up there. Fun fact about Colchester is that it was the original capital of England before London became the capital. But what I want to focus on is somebody called Matthew Hopkins, and
the witch finder general.
Well, I was going to say to you, who is Matthew Hopkins? But I guess from that you already know.
You're not allowed to say it was such a stupid title. And yes, okay, this is a little bit.
Yes, do you know why it's stupid? Because do you know who gave it to him? He gave it to himself.
He made it up. He looked at himself in the mirror one day and he said, "Oh, I'm the witch finder general." And yes, I know Shane and Ryan make this joke on BuzzFeed Unsolved, but we have been saying this for years. This is one of the reasons why we fell in love with them so much, because we were like, yes. You can't say Colchester properly or Essex properly, but you are totally right about the witch finder general.
Yeah, so just I mean, it is a bit depressing to end this episode on a man who is
a murderer.
I would consider him one of the earliest serial murderers in British history, and
he was just a legitimate.
That's obviously up for debate, but he basically was an English witch hunter who was active during the English Civil War, and he was the son of a Puritan minister, which I just think is interesting. And he went around Essex, just going to towns and accusing people of being witches, putting them on trial, and then instigating their murders. Yeah. He apparently began his career as a witch finder after he overheard some women in a pub, I think, in Manningtree, who were talking about their meetings with the devil. And I mean, if I overhear a bunch of people talking about meeting with the devil, I am just going to run in the other direction, because I do not want to be involved with that.
No, thank you. I mean, as much as I'd be like, cool, I'd also be like, bad idea.
He then was like, I have found a calling. I'm going to become a witch hunter. What does a witch hunter do? They travel around investigating claims of witchcraft.
Or inventing them.
He and his associates were particularly keen on finding witches' marks and linking his victims to the devil. So again, we talked about that in terms of in relation to the Lancaster and Pendle witches, but this was very much also a key thing that Matthew Hopkins was like, this is a surefire way to identify a witch. He worked with someone called John Stern. There were also lots of other individuals operating at this time, but together they sent more accused people to be hanged for witchcraft than all of the other witch hunters in England of the previous 160 years. So this is why I think, serial killer or mass murderer, because he alone is just literally going around pointing to people and saying, witch, kill them. And they were.
And like his obsession with finding a physical mark, like it's not new even at this point in time, but like it just doubles down on the demonizing of bodies that are other.
Yeah.
And like bodies that, because sometimes it would be like, oh, you've got a limp, witch. Oh, you're like, you had a baby with a birth defect, witch. Like it really solidified in English culture and English ideologies this concept that a physical deformation or blemish or whatever it may be, from something as simple as a mole to something as serious as a missing or like disabled limb, must be some kind of sign of evil intention.
Yeah. And I think that's really important. You have not just the kind of political mechanics of being able to use witch trials to control populations or to get rid of your political opponents, but also just on a kind of like individual level, it's really demonizing people for just who they are physically, their body or aspects of their body. So it's not even just what you do, but it is physically what you are.
Matthew Hopkins, ableist, incel, narcissist.
We're gonna get to that just now, because so his witch hunting career started in 1644 and then he retired in 1647 before dying of probably tuberculosis, but do you know how old he was?
He was quite young, wasn't he?
Yes. So I love films like The Witchfinder General, which, stars horror icon Vincent Price as the Witchfinder General. Yes, but I think it's such a miscasting because
so much older.
He was probably born around 1620, which makes him 24 at the age that he starts going around and, causing violent chaos.
He's basically the, like, what are we, 16th century? Like, equivalent of those, like, guys who graduate uni and then make a podcast or a YouTube and start spouting, like, their incel manifesto. Like, says the two girls that finished their PhDs and started a podcast, but it's different. But yeah, like, oh man, he literally just in his mid-20s was like, I've decided that I am the general of all the witchfinders, witchfinder supreme. I'm the best witchfinder who ever found witches.
Yeah. But I just always think that even if people have heard of Matthew Hopkins or the Witchfinder General, most people are genuinely quite surprised when you say, no, actually he was 24 and then he died before he hit 30. Like,
they're seeing an older guy in a big hat, in a black cloak, like, Vincent Price-esque, if not Vincent Price, like definitely seeing like an older guy. No, some fucking dude bro in his 20s.
Yeah, and I think thinking about this as a boy in his 20s, essentially, like a man boy,
frontal lobe has not finished developing.
I think it does kind of recontextualize some of these things, the witch trial things. But before he died, not only did he murder a lot of people, he also, because this was the thing that everyone was doing, published a book.
Oh, yeah, of course he did.
This book is called The Discovery of Witches.
I thought it was going to be called Finding Witches, the Matthew Hopkins tale.
Witches 101.
My life in witches. All the witches I did.
He basically, in this book, outlines his witch hunting methods. And that included the importance of the witch's marks and how to investigate a witch and what kind of tests you can do. to discover if someone is a witch or not. You mentioned drowning. I think that is something that came from
Ducking.
this book. Ducking, yep. And this book is key to the colonial spread of witch hunting. So I will end this episode here, but next week, or not next week, but in our next episode, we'll be crossing going across the pond to talk about.
If you decide to listen to the next episode next week, if you're listening to this just weeks after we put it out,
next time we'll be talking about American witchcraft and the Salem witch trials, and they were heavily influenced by this book. And with that,
we will be talking about as well creation of nation, basically, and how the kind of colonial aspects of using witch trials to create and maintain political power very much transferred over the pond. And I might be talking about something that I've wanted to talk about for a long time, and we'll probably still do a full episode on, but we might touch on some nocturnal ritual fantasy ideas. So join us next time for the, I think, third reappearance of ergotism on the Ghoul Guides Association. And thank you for that, Mary. There was lots of things I learned, lots of things I realized I didn't know, but I knew, or I thought it was something different. And I think, we can already see how much like interlapping there is, and interlapping, that's not a word. It is now.
Overlap and intertextuality and interweaving of all these different periods and contexts.
Thank you for saving me, as you always do, saving my face, saving my grace. But that was fantastic. Thank you, Mary Misgoing. If you want to hear more about any of the stuff that we talked about in this episode, make sure you either drop us a comment or reply to the Q&A on Spotify or whatever podcast platform you're listening to. You can also email us at ghoulguides666@gmail.com. You can find us on Instagram under the same name. You can fund our trip to Lancaster on Ko-fi. But of course, you don't actually have to do any of those things. But if you are watching this on a platform and you haven't liked, subscribed, or followed, please do. If you'd like to leave us a review, please do. But please don't be too mean, because we'll probably cry. And we're very fragile. But all of those things help us grow and create more content. And in the meantime, from both of us, stay safe and stay spooky.
Stay safe and stay spooky.